It was a cold morning in a small town, where the air was filled with the scent of rain on the horizon. The hustle and bustle of everyday life was about to be interrupted by a simple yet extraordinary act of kindness. A man, someone you'd pass by on the street without a second glance, stood at the counter of a small local clinic. His face was a mixture of anxiety and determination, eyes glistening with both hope and worry as he handed over the last of his savings. It wasn't much. In fact, it wasn't even close to enough to cover the treatment his sick child desperately needed. But for him, it was all he had. This man, let's call him Mark, had been working day and night, sacrificing his own needs, just to provide for his daughter, Emily. Emily had been fighting a rare, life-threatening illness for months. The medical bills had piled up, and Mark had watched helplessly as his little girl's health continued to deteriorate. The doctors had told him that the treatment she required was expensive, far beyond what he could afford. Yet, as any parent would, Mark had kept fighting. He wasn't going to give up on Emily, not when she still had a chance. And so, there he was, standing at the clinic, hoping that this small payment would be the first step toward getting her the care she so desperately needed. What happened next would change Mark's life forever. Unbeknownst to him, as he exchanged words with the receptionist, a wealthy-looking man had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. The man, dressed in an expensive suit, had the kind of presence that suggested he was no stranger to money or power. He wasn't supposed to be there, not in that part of town, not in that humble clinic. He had business elsewhere, meetings to attend and places to be. But for reasons unknown to him, his attention had been drawn to Mark. There was something about the sincerity in his actions, the way he spoke with such deep care for his daughter, that caught the rich visitor's interest. The man watched as Mark's frustration grew. He had handed over his savings, but it was clear from the receptionist's response that it still wasn't enough. Mark was stuck. He didn't have any more options. The doctors had already warned him that without the full treatment, his daughter's health could take a turn for the worse. Mark's face grew pale. His shoulders slumped in defeat. But it wasn't the defeat of giving up. It was the kind of defeat that comes when you've done everything humanly possible, and yet you still can't reach the finish line. The rich visitor approached him, his footsteps quiet but firm. Mark didn't notice him at first, lost in his own thoughts. But when the stranger spoke, it was as if the world stopped for a moment. "I overheard what you said to the receptionist," the man began, his voice smooth and calm. Mark turned, confused at first, but then something in the man's eyes caught his attention. It wasn't pity or judgment. It was curiosity, genuine curiosity mixed with something else, something that seemed almost like concern. "I might be able to help," the man continued, taking a step closer. "I heard your daughter is in need of treatment. I can cover the rest of the cost for you." Mark blinked in disbelief. For a moment, he thought he might be imagining it. People didn't offer to pay for strangers' medical bills. Not in the real world. Not in a world where money was hard to come by, where people barely had enough to get by themselves. But this man, this stranger, was offering something more than money. He was offering a chance, a lifeline for his daughter. Mark's mind raced. Was this for real? Could he trust him? Why would someone with so much wealth, someone who could clearly afford anything, be so interested in helping a man like him? Mark had heard the rumors, of course. Stories of rich people who donated to causes, the philanthropists who gave away fortunes to help those in need. But this was different. This wasn't some charity event or a well-publicized donation. This was a stranger in a clinic, offering to help a man he had never met, just because he overheard a conversation. Before Mark could respond, the man added, "But there's something I need from you in return." The words hit Mark like a ton of bricks. What could this man want in exchange for his generosity? Mark's mind began to swirl. Was this some sort of catch? Was this a scheme, a trap? It didn't feel like it. The man's demeanor was calm, his offer genuine, or at least it seemed so. But the uncertainty lingered, like a shadow clouding Mark's thoughts. "What is it?" Mark finally asked, his voice cautious, but hopeful. The man smiled, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "I want you to consider a business proposal. I think you and I could be of great use to each other." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Business proposal? Was this some kind of investment opportunity? What did this wealthy man see in him? A simple man with nothing but a love for his daughter. What could he possibly offer in exchange for the treatment Emily needed? Mark had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. This conversation was far from over, and it would change his life, and possibly Emily's, forever. The man's words hung in the air, a silent promise of something bigger. But what was he really offering? And what would Mark have to sacrifice in return? Was this the break he had been waiting for? Or was he about to step into a world that was far more complicated and dangerous than he could ever imagine? Mark didn't know, but he was about to find out. Mark's mind raced as he stood there, trying to process the words that the stranger had just spoken. "A business proposal," he repeated, almost more to himself than to the man standing before him. He glanced down at his hands, still holding on to the small amount of cash he had managed to scrape together for Emily's treatment. It was all slipping away from him, and in its place was this strange man, offering a solution that was far too easy, too clean. Nothing in Mark's life had ever been that simple. The man could sense Mark's hesitation. He didn't push, but he didn't step back either. Instead, he simply waited, letting the tension settle between them like a thick fog. Finally, Mark found his voice again, though it shook slightly. "What do you mean, business proposal?" The man's eyes sparkled with a hint of something dangerous. Excitement, maybe, or anticipation. He spoke slowly, as if weighing every word before he said it. "I run a private investment firm. We deal in all kinds of ventures, but what I specialize in is talent. People who don't have the resources or the connections, but have potential. People who have something to offer, even if they don't realize it yet." Mark frowned, confused but intrigued. "I'm not some businessman. I'm just a father trying to get his daughter the treatment she needs." The rich man's smile widened, almost as if he'd been expecting this response. "And that's exactly why I think you're perfect. People like you, Mark, have a fire that most others lack. You've been knocked down, but you keep getting back up. That's the kind of person I need, someone who won't quit, no matter what." Mark felt a lump form in his throat. The words struck a chord with him. For so long, he had felt like he was fighting an impossible battle. Emily's illness, the mounting bills, the never-ending cycle of desperation. It all weighed so heavily on him. But the thought that someone, anyone, might see something in him, something valuable, was like a glimmer of hope in the middle of a storm. He glanced at the man's tailored suit, the expensive watch on his wrist. Everything about him screamed wealth and power. Mark had never been around people like this, never had any reason to interact with them. So why now? Why him? Why me? Mark asked, his voice a little more steady now. The man chuckled softly, the sound almost like a purr. "Because I know what it's like to struggle. I wasn't always rich. I started with nothing, just like you. But I saw opportunities where others didn't. I took risks, calculated ones, and it paid off. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. I could help you get back on your feet, get you into something bigger, something that could set you and your daughter up for life. But you'll have to trust me. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He wanted to trust this man. He really did. But everything in him screamed that it was too good to be true. There had to be a catch. What's the catch? He asked bluntly. The man smiled again, but this time there was something unsettling about it. No catch, Mark. Just one simple condition. You have to leave everything behind. Walk away from your old life and start fresh with me. I'll provide everything you need. Money, resources, a new beginning. But you have to commit. No looking back. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was everything he wanted. Everything he had dreamed of for himself and Emily. A fresh start. No more debts. No more struggling just to get by. A chance for Emily to get the treatment she needed. A chance to give her a life that wasn't dominated by illness. It was the dream he never thought would come true. But the cost was steep. Leave everything behind, Mark repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't just walk away from my life. My daughter needs me. I've been taking care of her on my own for so long. How could I just think about it? The man interrupted gently, his voice almost coaxing. This isn't just for you. It's for her too. You've been doing everything you can. But sometimes the best way to help someone is to give them the future they deserve. You can't do that while you're stuck in the past. Mark was silent, his mind spinning. His old life, his old job, his old routines. They were all tied to the struggle, the constant worry. But leaving it behind, severing those ties, it was terrifying. Could he really trust this man? Could he take a leap into the unknown? He couldn't afford to make a mistake, not with Emily's life on the line. I need time to think about it, Mark finally said, his voice hoarse. The man nodded, as if he had expected this answer. Of course. Take your time. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. Don't let fear hold you back. And with that, the man turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in the clinic, his mind racing. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He walked out into the cold, the rain now falling steadily. Mark didn't notice the droplets soaking his shirt, his thoughts too consumed with the offer that had just been made. What if this was his one chance to get everything he wanted for Emily? What if it was the solution he had been searching for all along? But then, another thought crept into his mind. What if this man had ulterior motives? What if this was some kind of trap? A way to manipulate him into doing something he would regret? As he walked down the street, Mark's phone buzzed. In his pocket, it was a message from the clinic, a reminder that Emily's next round of tests was coming up. The urgency of the situation hit him like a wave, crashing over him. He needed to make a decision. Time was running out, but what if, in making that decision, he was walking into a whole new world, a world that would change everything he knew about himself, about his daughter, and about the kind of future they could have. The answers seemed so close, yet just out of reach. And as the rain fell harder, Mark realized that he couldn't put off the decision for much longer. The clock was ticking, and he was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. The next few days felt like a blur for Mark. The decision weighed heavily on him, and every time he thought he was ready to make up his mind, something else pulled him back. Emily's condition was worsening. The hospital called, offering more options, but they came with costs that he simply couldn't afford. His savings were gone, and the reality that his daughter might not make it without that treatment, without the money, was starting to settle in like a cold, heavy fog. The offer from the wealthy man had felt like a lifeline at first, but the arm, closer, Mark got to making a decision. The more he wondered whether it was truly a way out or just another trap. What kind of man makes an offer like that out of nowhere, without asking for anything in return? Mark had spent his life working hard, doing everything the right way, but now, standing at this crossroads, it felt like the rules didn't apply anymore. As the days passed, Mark found himself in the quiet of his apartment, staring at the message from the man again. The man had given him an ultimatum. Time was running out, but then, just when Mark felt like he was about to make the decision, something unexpected happened. Emily took a sudden turn for the worse. Her condition deteriorated so rapidly that Mark barely had time to react. He rushed her to the hospital, his heart racing in his chest. There, as the doctors ran tests and tried to stabilize her, Mark was forced to face the grim reality of what his life had become. The treatment Emily needed was out of reach. The world he had tried to build for her, a world of hope and safety, was slipping away. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, offering condolences, but Mark couldn't hear them. His thoughts were consumed by the one person who had offered him a chance to save her, this mysterious businessman. Just as he thought he was out of options, the man called again. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he already knew what had happened. "Mark," the man said, "I know what you're going through. I can help you. I can get the treatment you need for Emily right now." Mark's mind spun. He was so close to saying no, to walking away, but now there was a new urgency. Could he really afford to be cautious when Emily's life was at stake? "I don't know what to think," Mark admitted. "I don't know if I can trust you." The man paused, his voice softening. "I understand, but I'm offering you a chance, Mark. A chance to save your daughter. But you have to trust me. There's no time left." The words were like a knife to Mark's chest, cutting through his doubt. He felt cornered, trapped by his own desperation. He agreed, without fully understanding what he was agreeing to, only knowing that it was the only way he could possibly help Emily. The moment he hung up, the hospital room felt colder. Mark had made his choice. But what would that choice mean? Hours later, the businessman arrived at the hospital. He didn't look like someone who would enter a room with the weight of a decision so heavy on his shoulders. He was calm, poised, almost regal. Mark barely recognized the person standing in front of him, the same man who had offered him a lifeline, the same man whose words now felt like a promise Mark had made to save his daughter. With a few quiet words exchanged, the man made arrangements. Mark didn't know how, but within hours, the treatment was set up. The doctors, stunned by the sudden change, could only nod in disbelief. Emily was receiving the treatment she desperately needed. But as the man turned to leave, he stopped. "Mark," he said quietly, looking him in the eyes, "you've made the right decision. But know this, what I offered you wasn't just about Emily. It was about seeing potential, and I hope one day you'll see it in yourself." Mark blinked, the weight of the man's words sinking in. As the man walked away, Mark stood in the hospital room, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily was going to make it. She was going to get better. For the first time in a long time, Mark allowed himself to feel hope. But there was something else, the thought that lingered in his mind long after the man left. What had he truly agreed to? Was this a favor, or was it a debt Mark now owed? The man's final words echoed in his mind, and Mark wasn't sure if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if he had truly found the opportunity he'd been searching for. Weeks passed, and Emily's condition improved. The doctors were amazed at her recovery, and Mark felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in so long. He was grateful, but a part of him still wondered about the man who had made it all possible. Was he a savior, Or was this just the beginning of something Mark wasn't ready for? As Mark left the hospital one afternoon, he received another message from the man. The words were simple. "It's time for you to see what comes next. I'll be waiting." Mark stared at the message, his hands trembling. His life had just changed in a way he could never have imagined. And whatever came next, whatever this man had in store for him, Mark knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. The future was a vast unknown, and Mark realized that his daughter's recovery wasn't just a new beginning. Save for her, it was a new beginning for him too. But at what cost? The answer he still didn't know. But in the back of his mind, the question lingered. Had he truly saved his daughter? Or had he just signed up for a future he couldn't yet understand? The story didn't end there. For Mark, the real journey was only just beginning.